Bleeding Love, a short love story inspired by the song of the same name by Leona Lewis. Chapter 1. Closed Off Heart. Charlotte Clark was the very picture of success, a paragon of poise and control, a bright, intelligent woman who had clawed her way up the corporate ladder to a coveted executive position at a prestigious fashion house. She was the envy of many. She was the kind of woman who, even on a Monday morning, managed to appear as though she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, impeccably dressed, her honey blonde hair cascading in soft waves, her sea green eyes focused and determined. Her corner office overlooked the pulsating heart of London, but the panoramic view did little to shake the cocoon of solitude that she had woven around herself. Her past heartbreak had left her well versed in the harsh realities of love. A painful lesson learned early, she had made a solemn vow never to surrender herself to the whims of the heart again. Her passion was now reserved for her work, her time occupied by business meetings, fashion events, and an array of spreadsheets and design sketches. Charlotte's emotional fortress was her sanctuary. She wore her aloofness like an armor, a barrier to keep her heart safe from any amorous advances. The subtle flirtations from the handsome men who crossed her path were deftly parried, and the dreamy glances thrown her way were left unreciprocated. She lived in a world where emotions played no part. It was safer that way. One evening, while working late, Charlotte received an unexpected invitation to a high-profile charity event that was to be held that weekend. Knowing the importance of networking in her line of work, she reluctantly agreed to attend. She was often the center of attention at these soirees, her stunning looks and prestigious job title attracting both men and women alike. Yet she always maintained her distance, her heart protected by the invisible shield she had erected. She had built a life that revolved around safety and control, and she had no intention of disrupting the equilibrium she had so meticulously created. Despite her detachment, these events always held a certain allure for Charlotte. The luxurious settings, the glamorous guests, the enticing scent of cologne and perfume mixing with the smell of decadent cuisine, the low hum of voices punctuated by delicate laughter. These elements brewed a delicious cocktail of sensory experiences that had a strangely exhilarating effect on her, despite her usual reservation. On the night of the event, Charlotte, wearing a sleek emerald gown that accentuated her slim figure and golden hair, arrived at the venue. She moved elegantly through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, her eyes scanning the room as she sipped from a crystal champagne flute. Then, amidst the sea of black tuxedos and colourful gowns, she saw him, a stranger in the crowd who commanded attention, his dark hair, the chiseled jawline, the intense gaze of his piercing blue eyes. There was an immediate physical pull, a visceral attraction that took her by surprise. The room seemed to blur around him as an unspoken promise of passion hung in the air between them. He lifted his glass in her direction, a silent acknowledgement that had Charlotte's heart fluttering against her ribcage like a trapped bird. Unnerved by her reaction to this stranger, she retreated, a whisper of fear chilling her. But as she left the room, she couldn't help but look back at him, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The foundations of her carefully constructed fortress seemed to crack at the corners. She was falling, spiraling into an abyss of desire she had sworn to avoid. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of vulnerability creeping in, threatening to upend her world. The silent stranger, with his magnetic gaze, had ignited a spark she hadn't felt in a long while. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? What was his story? And most importantly, why did her heart leap at his mere glance? In the safety of her sleek silver sports car, Charlotte allowed herself a moment of honesty. Her hand fluttered to her chest, her fingers grazing the diamond pendant resting against her collarbone, a talisman, a reminder of her vow. She could almost hear her own heart pounding against her ribcage, each beat echoing the face of the enigmatic man. A sigh escaped her as she leaned against the cool leather of the seat, her gaze lost in the glimmering cityscape of London. For the first time in many years, her well-guarded heart yearned for something more, something wild and uncontrollable. It yearned for passion, for a love that was so intense that it felt like a sweet wound, a bleeding love. Despite the chill of the evening, a warm flush spread across her face. Images of the stranger intruded her thoughts. His intense gaze, the way his lips moved when he spoke, the elegant way he held his drink. She pictured him moving closer, his breath warm against her skin, his hand finding hers in a room full of strangers. She shook her head as if to shake the enticing thoughts away. "No, Charlotte," she admonished herself aloud, gripping the steering wheel. "No distractions, no weaknesses." Yet even as she said it, she couldn't help but replay the evening's events. She couldn't erase the image of the mysterious man from her mind. The invitation, the event, the encounter, they all felt like a prelude to something more, something that was frightening yet oddly exhilarating. As she drove through the winding city roads, the neon lights of London illuminating her path, she felt a stir within her. She was standing on the precipice of change, a wave of intense, previously suppressed feelings threatening to sweep her away. Despite her best efforts, Charlotte felt a flicker of excitement, a wild anticipation that caused a shiver of pleasure to ripple through her. Her heart had been dormant for years, encased in a fortress of solitude and career ambitions. But that night, she felt it stir, awakened by a stranger's gaze. Was she ready to let go of her fears and allow herself to feel again, to love again? Only time would tell. But that night, a crack appeared in the walls of Charlotte's carefully guarded heart, and for the first time, she didn't rush to mend it. Instead, she allowed herself to feel, to yearn, to bleed love. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Attraction. The week that followed the charity event was filled with an uncharacteristic restlessness for Charlotte. The mysterious man's image invaded her every thought, and the undercurrent of desire she'd felt that night continued to surge like a hidden river. One day, while she was in a design meeting, her assistant rushed in, apologizing for the interruption, and handed Charlotte a business card. She turned it over, and her heart skipped a beat. The name Maxwell Harrington was embossed in gold, and beneath it, CEO Harrington Investments. "The gentleman is waiting in your office," her assistant informed her, and Charlotte nodded, her fingers tracing the edges of the card. It was him, the man from the charity event. As she walked towards her office, she felt an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation. Pushing the door open, she saw him. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, Maxwell stood by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the sprawling London skyline. As he turned to face her, she caught her breath. Up close, he was even more handsome, his blue eyes darker, more intense. "Miss Clark," he greeted, his voice as smooth as aged whiskey. He reached out for a handshake, his touch firm yet gentle, sending a jolt of electric energy up her arm. The meeting was supposed to be about potential investment opportunities in her fashion house, but the tension in the room was palpable. It was a dance of words and lingering looks, of paperwork interspersed with subtle flirtations. They were like two magnetic poles, drawn to each other, yet maintaining a distance. She observed him as he spoke, the way his lips curved around words, the subtle deepening of his voice when he was making an important point, and how his eyes sparkled with a hidden desire that matched hers. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by light banter and lingering glances. There was a natural chemistry between them, a certain electrifying connection that Charlotte had never experienced before. She felt herself getting drawn in, captivated by this charismatic man. As the meeting drew to a close, Maxwell stood up, placing his hands on her desk as he leaned forward. His cologne filled her senses, a mix of sandalwood and spice, and she felt her heartbeat quicken. "I look forward to working with you, Miss Clark," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "And I with you, Mr. Harrington," she replied, a hint of a promise in her tone. As he walked out of her office, Charlotte sank into her chair, her body tingling with the remnants of his presence. She was dangerously close to crossing the line she had drawn for herself years ago. She was playing with fire and she knew it, but with every moment spent with Maxwell, her resolve seemed to weaken, her heart yearning to explore the connection she felt with him. As she sat alone in her office, she realized that her carefully controlled world was spiraling into a whirlwind of desire and anticipation. Her thoughts were consumed by him, his scent still lingering in the air, his voice echoing in her ears. For the first time in a long while, Charlotte felt truly alive. Her heart was bleeding love, a sweet yet terrifying sensation. Despite the fear, there was an excitement, a thrill that she had long forgotten. She was walking on a tightrope, balancing her fear of heartbreak with the lure of love. And even though the fall could be devastating, she couldn't deny the intoxicating feeling of the wind in her hair and the view from the top. For the rest of the day, Charlotte found herself lost in her thoughts, her mind replaying the encounter, each word, each glance, each charged moment. Maxwell's undeniable charm had managed to pierce her armor, and she felt an undeniable attraction towards him. That night, lying in her king-sized bed draped in Egyptian cotton, Charlotte's thoughts drifted towards Maxwell. She imagined him there with her, his strong arms around her, his whispers in her ear. She could almost feel his breath on her skin, his fingers tracing a path down her spine. She clutched at her pillow, her breath hitching as her imagination painted a vivid picture of passion and intimacy. There was a sharp intake of breath as she quickly sat up, shaking her head to clear her thoughts. She was startled by her own desires, by the intensity of the feelings that Maxwell had invoked in her. She had allowed herself to get carried away by the mere thought of him, and it both excited and scared her. As she laid back down, she decided that she had to keep her feelings in check. She couldn't let herself get carried away. She needed to maintain her distance, to keep herself safe from the potential heartbreak that love brought with it. It was just a business relationship, she reminded herself. Nothing more, nothing less. But even as she told herself this, Charlotte couldn't help but wonder if she could resist the attraction she felt for Maxwell. Was it possible to ignore the sparks that flew every time they were in the same room? Could she deny herself the pleasure of his company, the excitement of his touch? She closed her eyes, a sigh escaping her lips as she allowed herself to sink into the soft comfort of her bed. One thing was clear, she was standing at the crossroads of desire and fear, and she had a tough decision to make. As sleep finally claimed her, Charlotte's dreams were filled with images of Maxwell, of shared glances and secret smiles, of soft whispers and softer touches. Her heart ached with a strange longing, her body humming with anticipation. Unbeknownst to her, across town in a high-rise apartment, Maxwell Harrington found himself equally restless, his thoughts filled with a woman whose beauty and spirit had captivated him. And so the dance of desire continued, a dance as old as time itself, filled with anticipation, passion, and the undeniable allure of the forbidden. The stage was set, the actors ready. All that remained was for the curtain to rise on the next act of their tantalizing tale. Chapter 3. An Unavoidable Encounter. Maxwell Harrington was a man of focus and dedication. His firm, Harrington Investments, was his pride and joy, a result of years of hard work and meticulous planning. He was as dedicated to his work as he was to his well-groomed appearance, his broad shoulders fitting comfortably into the finest suits, his dark hair always styled to perfection, a charming smile playing on his lips, revealing a set of perfect white teeth, his intense gaze enough to melt even the coldest hearts. But ever since meeting Charlotte Clark, his focus had faltered. Her image continuously invaded his thoughts, the memory of her laughter echoing in his mind, her sparkling sea-green eyes imprinted in his memory. It was an attraction he hadn't expected, but one he found impossible to resist. He found himself daydreaming about her, about holding her close, their bodies moving together in a rhythm as old as time, his breath hitched at the very thought, his heart pounding against his ribcage. In an attempt to take control of his thoughts, Maxwell decided to dive back into his work, but fate had different plans. An invitation arrived for another event, a fashion show this time, hosted by Charlotte's company. It was a chance for potential investors to see the heart of the business. It was also another chance for him to see Charlotte. In the chaos of flashing lights and buzzing conversations, Maxwell's eyes sought one person. There she was, standing in the crowd, radiant as ever, her emerald gown hugging her curves, her hair cascading down like liquid gold. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a spark, a connection, a magnetic pull that seemed impossible to resist. She approached him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Maxwell, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice low, her words carrying an underlying hint of anticipation. "The pleasure is all mine, Charlotte," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. The sexual tension between them was palpable, a charged undercurrent that made the air between them crackle with electricity. As the fashion show commenced, their bodies brushed against each other in the cramped space. Each touch was like a jolt of electricity, their shared glances holding promises of passion and desire. He could smell her perfume, a delicate mix of vanilla and roses, a scent that would forever be imprinted in his memory. Every now and then he'd catch her looking at him, a flush creeping up her cheeks, her gaze quickly shifting away. He'd smile to himself, a deep sense of satisfaction filling him. The attraction was mutual. As the night wore on, Maxwell found it increasingly hard to resist her. The way her lips curved when she smiled, the soft sound of her laughter, the seductive glint in her eyes, all of it was intoxicating. Caught in a whirlwind of desire and anticipation, Maxwell decided to take a risk. Leaning towards her, he softly whispered in her ear, "Dinner tomorrow, Charlotte?" His breath tickled her skin, his words sending a shiver down her spine. She glanced at him, her sea-green eyes meeting his. For a moment she hesitated, her fear threatening to overpower her desire. But looking into his eyes, seeing the promise of passion they held, she found herself nodding. "Yes, Maxwell, dinner it is." As they parted ways that night, both of them were consumed by a sense of excitement and apprehension. A dangerous game had been set in motion, a dance of desire and attraction. Their hearts bled love, a sweet wound that they were too scared to admit, too drawn to resist. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of a love story that was as passionate as it was complicated. The fashion show had been a success, but that wasn't what kept Charlotte up late into the night. It was Maxwell's proposal for dinner that had her mind racing. She found herself both excited and nervous, a mix of emotions that she hadn't experienced in a while. She knew she was taking a risk, opening her heart to a man who could potentially shatter it, but the magnetic pull she felt towards him was something she could no longer ignore. She was drawn to him, her heart yearning to explore the passion that sparked between them. Meanwhile, Maxwell found himself in a similar state of mind. A sense of anticipation filled him as he thought of their upcoming dinner. He'd felt an undeniable connection with Charlotte from the moment he'd seen her, and the thought of exploring that connection filled him with excitement. The days leading up to their dinner were filled with an unspoken tension. Their conversations were business as usual, yet there was an undercurrent of something more, a hint of anticipation, a shared secret. They exchanged glances that held promises, smiles that were more intimate, words that carried more weight. Their shared anticipation only intensified as the day of their dinner approached. There was an electric energy between them, a sizzling tension that made every interaction more intense, every moment more significant. And so, as Charlotte prepared for their dinner, dressing up in a sleek black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. She looked at herself in the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She was taking a leap of faith, letting her heart lead for the first time in a long while. Across town, Maxwell was getting ready as well. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, his heart beating in anticipation. He had planned this evening to perfection, hoping to impress Charlotte. Both of them, standing in front of their mirrors, could feel the excitement and anticipation building. The sexual tension, the longing, the unspoken desire, it was all leading to this moment, this dinner. They were stepping into uncharted territory, their hearts bleeding love, their minds filled with thoughts of each other. This was the start of something new, something exciting, a dance of desire and passion, of love and fear. It was a dance that promised to change their lives forever, a dance that they were ready to embrace. As the evening approached, Charlotte and Maxwell knew that they were on the verge of something beautiful and intoxicating. The question was, would they be able to handle the intensity, the passion that was about to be unleashed? Only time would tell. Chapter 4. Dinner and Desires. The evening arrived, cloaking London in a soft blanket of darkness, the city lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. Charlotte felt a flutter in her stomach as she looked at her reflection one last time. She was stepping into uncharted territory, and the thrill of it made her heart race. Maxwell, on the other hand, was a picture of calm, his pulse steady, his mind focused. However, under this composed exterior, his heart pounded with anticipation. He was about to spend an evening with a woman who had inexplicably entranced him, and he couldn't wait to see where the night would lead. Maxwell arrived at her doorstep in a sleek black car, looking dashing in a crisp navy suit. Charlotte, dressed in her elegant black dress, looked breathtaking. The way he looked at her made her feel desired, special. There was a glint in his eyes, a promise of a memorable evening. They headed to a quiet, intimate restaurant in the heart of the city, their conversation light and full of laughter. The air between them was filled with anticipation, the lingering glances and the subtle touches only intensifying the connection between them. Throughout dinner, they exchanged stories, flirted subtly, and shared knowing smiles. Their chemistry was undeniable, their connection almost palpable. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of excitement and tension, a dangerous cocktail that had their hearts racing. As Maxwell looked at Charlotte across the candlelit table, her eyes sparkling with mirth, he realized just how taken he was by her. There was an aura about her, a magnetism that drew him in. Her laugh was infectious, her intelligence alluring, and her beauty mesmerizing. Charlotte, on the other hand, found herself equally entranced by him. The way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he looked at her, all made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. There was an air of respect around him, a sense of power and control that she found incredibly attractive. The evening went by in a blur, the hours passing like minutes. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, a dance of words and emotions. They shared secrets, dreams and laughter, the connection between them growing with each passing moment. As the evening wound down, they found themselves reluctant to part. The night had been magical, filled with sparks and unspoken promises. Their hearts bled with a sweet, intoxicating love, a feeling neither of them had expected but couldn't deny. Walking her to her doorstep, Maxwell took her hand in his, sending a jolt of electricity through both of them. There was a moment of silence as they stood there, their bodies inches apart, their hearts pounding in sync. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Charlotte," Maxwell said, his voice barely above a whisper. His gaze was intense, his hold on her hand firm yet gentle. "The pleasure was all mine, Maxwell," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. There was a moment when it seemed like he might lean in, close the distance between them. The anticipation was a sweet torment, their bodies aching for the connection. But he held back, releasing her hand and stepping away. "Good night, Charlotte," he said, his voice carrying a hint of regret. He gave her one last lingering look before turning around and leaving. As she closed the door, Charlotte could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers. The anticipation of their almost kiss lingered in the air, a silent promise of what was yet to come. That night, as they lay in their respective beds, their minds were filled with thoughts of each other. The memory of their intimate dinner, the tension-filled goodbye, the promise of future encounters. It was an intoxicating blend of excitement and anticipation, a sweet ache of desire and longing. Their hearts bled with love, a feeling they were beginning to accept, a passion they were eager to explore. The dance of desire was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Chapter 5: The Stirring of Hearts. In the days that followed their dinner, an underlying tension weaved its way into Charlotte and Maxwell's interactions. Their conversations were marked by a subtle intimacy, their exchanges filled with unspoken promises and restrained desires. The intense chemistry they had shared during their dinner had left a lasting impression on both of them. The memory of that night lingered in their minds, a sweet reminder of a shared connection, of a bond that was becoming harder to deny. During a routine business meeting, their usual professional demeanor gave way to shared smiles and lingering looks. The sexual tension between them was palpable, sparking an electrifying undercurrent in their exchanges. Charlotte, lost in a sea of documents and financial reports, found her mind drifting to Maxwell more often than she cared to admit. The way his eyes lit up when he spoke about his business, the focused look on his face when he was lost in thought, the way his lips curved into a smile when he caught her staring at him. It was all becoming a sweet torment. For Maxwell, it was the same. Charlotte's laughter rang in his ears, her sparkling eyes haunted his thoughts, and her infectious energy left him longing for more of her. He wanted to get to know her beyond their professional encounters, to explore the connection they had both felt. One evening, after a particularly intense business meeting, Maxwell took a bold step. As they stepped out of the conference room, he turned to Charlotte, a determined look in his eyes. "Charlotte, I can't ignore what's between us anymore," he said, his voice carrying a hint of urgency. "I want to explore this connection we have. Would you let me?" Charlotte looked up at him, taken aback by his confession. She felt a rush of emotions, surprise, excitement, fear, but underlying it all was a strong desire to say yes, to let him in, to give in to the passion that was brewing between them. Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, Maxwell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's explore this. Together." A spark of excitement lit up Maxwell's eyes. He reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. Their eyes locked, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It was a moment filled with promise, with anticipation, with an unspoken agreement to take the leap together. In the days that followed, their relationship took on a new dimension. Their conversations grew deeper, their glances more intimate, their touch more lingering. Their hearts were stirring, caught in a dance of desire and affection. At night, they found themselves lost in thoughts of each other. Images of stolen glances, shared smiles, and anticipated touches filled their minds. Their hearts bled love, a sweet wound that neither of them wanted to heal. Their professional relationship was transforming, blossoming into something more intimate, more personal. They were standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into the unknown, their hearts beating in sync, their spirits intertwined. The dance of desire was becoming more intense, their connection deepening with each passing day. The anticipation of what lay ahead was both exciting and terrifying, but both Charlotte and Maxwell were ready to explore the depth of their feelings, ready to dive into the intoxicating world of desire and affection. As they stepped into the next phase of their relationship, one thing was clear. Their hearts were bleeding love, a sweet, intoxicating emotion that was impossible to resist. They were ready to explore their burgeoning relationship, to let their hearts lead the way. And so, their journey of love and desire continued, a beautiful dance of two hearts yearning for each other, ready to explore the depths of their shared connection. A beautiful dance of two hearts yearning for each other, ready to explore the depths of their shared connection. They knew the path ahead wouldn't be without its hurdles, but they were willing to brave it together, drawn by the irresistible pull of their hearts. Their days were filled with shared laughter, lingering glances and whispered promises. Their professional meetings became a sweet torment, a delicious dance of restraint and desire. Their moments alone, though few and far between, became precious, stolen moments that they treasured. In these moments, they found solace, a sense of familiarity that was both comforting and exciting. They found shared dreams, shared fears, and an undeniable connection that only seemed to grow stronger with time. Maxwell, always the more confident of the two, was becoming increasingly enamored with Charlotte. He found himself yearning for her company, her laughter, her presence. She was a constant in his thoughts, a sweet distraction that he couldn't, and didn't want to, resist. Charlotte, on the other hand, found herself falling for Maxwell in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was drawn to his charisma, his intellect, and his respect for her. He was different from the men she had known, in ways she found incredibly attractive. Their hearts were bleeding love, a feeling they had once feared, but were now beginning to embrace. They were falling into a whirlpool of desire and affection, a journey they were eager to embark on together. As the days turned into weeks, they found themselves on the brink of something beautiful, something passionate. Their dance of desire was becoming more intense, their feelings for each other more profound. The anticipation, the excitement, the uncertainty, it was all leading up to a moment that promised to change their lives forever. They knew they were treading on uncharted territory, embarking on a journey neither of them had planned for. But there was an excitement in the uncertainty, a thrill in the anticipation. They were ready to dive head first into the unknown, their hearts leading the way. In their world of high-stakes business and cutthroat competition, Charlotte and Maxwell had found something unique, something precious. They had found a connection that transcended the professional, a bond that was deeply personal. And as they stood on the brink of a new chapter in their lives, they realized one undeniable truth. They were bleeding love. Their hearts were aching with a sweet, intoxicating feeling that was impossible to ignore. They were falling in love, and they were ready to embrace it, ready to let their hearts bleed love. Chapter 6. The Dance of Desire. Days turned into weeks. and the bond between Charlotte and Maxwell deepened. Their hearts were entangled in a dance of desire, their minds filled with thoughts of each other. The passion that had begun as a spark during their dinner had now blossomed into a raging fire, a flame that lit their path forward. Charlotte found herself ensnared in Maxwell's charm, his respect for her only heightening her feelings. His presence in her life had become a sweet torment, a delightful distraction she couldn't resist. Every conversation, every glance, every touch filled her with a sense of longing and anticipation. Maxwell, on the other hand, found himself equally entranced by Charlotte. Her laughter was music to his ears, her intelligence an irresistible allure, and her beauty a sight that left him breathless. He found himself yearning for her, his heart beating in sync with hers. Their professional meetings became a thrilling dance of subtle flirtations and stolen glances. The tension was palpable, the anticipation a sweet torment. Every interaction was charged with an underlying passion, an unspoken promise of a deeper connection. As they navigated through their professional lives, they found solace in each other's company. They found shared dreams, shared fears, and a bond that only grew stronger with each passing day. Their hearts bled love, a sweet wound that was impossible to ignore. One evening, after a particularly long day, Maxwell found himself at Charlotte's doorstep. The night was cool, the city lights twinkling in the distance. As he knocked on her door, his heart pounded with anticipation. Charlotte, surprised by his sudden visit, felt a rush of emotions. Surprise, excitement, fear, but underlying it all was a strong desire to let him in, to give in to the passion that had been brewing between them. As she opened the door, their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. There was a moment of silence as they stood there, their bodies inches apart, their hearts pounding in sync. Without a word, Maxwell stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He cupped her face, his touch gentle yet firm. Their eyes locked, a silent confession of their shared desire. "Charlotte," he whispered, his voice barely above a whisper, "I can't ignore this anymore." Charlotte, her heart pounding, found herself leaning into his touch. "Neither can I, Maxwell," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. There was a moment of silence as they stood there, their bodies tingling with anticipation. The air between them was charged with tension, their hearts pounding in sync. It was a moment of unspoken promises, of shared desires, of a love that had been quietly nurtured. As Maxwell leaned in, Charlotte closed her eyes, a rush of emotions overwhelming her. His lips met hers in a soft, tender kiss, a kiss that was a promise of a deeper connection, a stronger bond. The world around them seemed to fade away as they lost themselves in each other, their hearts bleeding love. Their relationship had taken a beautiful turn, their hearts entangled in a dance of desire and passion. They were exploring a love that had bloomed amidst the high-stakes world of business, a bond that transcended the professional. They were ready to embrace their feelings, ready to dive into the intoxicating world of love and desire. As they stood there, their bodies pressed against each other, their hearts pounding in sync, they knew they had crossed a line, but it was a line they were willing to cross, a journey they were ready to embark on. Their hearts bled love, a sweet, intoxicating feeling that was impossible to resist. They were falling in love, and they were ready to embrace it, ready to let their hearts bleed love. Their journey of love and desire was just beginning, a beautiful dance of two hearts beating in sync.
We hope you enjoyed this short story. To hear more stories like this one, why not subscribe to the Romance Diaries and hit the bell icon so that you can get notified each time we put out a new story or confession. That way you won't need to miss a thing. Or if you'd like to experience your own true life romance, why not visit one of our sponsors by clicking a link in the description.